Hey there, dear tech fam. So, this is an episode that I recorded last year, but based on everything that I had going on, I couldn't release it at the time. But it was such an incredible conversation, I wanted to make sure to release it as soon as I got the chance. Let's explore the journey of a founder, the art of pivoting, and the role of resilience and adaptability in both startups and life. I sat down with Taylor McLoughlin, a seasoned entrepreneur, product leader, and co founder of Ambient. Taylor's career is a masterclass on embracing change, from a 3-month contract that turned into a deep dive into startups to navigating multiple pivots and now shaping the future of AI powered workflow automation. But here's the thing, Taylor isn't just about tech. He's an avid sailor, a teacher, and someone who deeply values mental fitness. We spoke about how offshore racing mirrors the challenges of running a startup, why psychological fitness is just as important as technical expertise, and how to navigate the fast-changing world of AI. This conversation is packed with insights on leadership, resilience, and the lessons that every founder or aspiring founder needs to hear. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. All right. Hey, Taylor.
Oh, there we go. How's it going?
It's going really well. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah.
All right. So, Taylor, one thing that you sent over in your on the form that I was actually very curious about because I had no idea was about
hmm
sailing. I like starting off places where we're usually not gonna be starting off. So this has nothing to do with technology, but I think it'll end up having a lot to do with your journey. Walk me through it. What does sailing mean to you? Competitions, instructing, what is that?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a newfound hobby uh, in California, which is where I grew up. Right before I moved to New York about 5 years ago, I took a couple classes out of curiosity, and there's something about being close to the water, in touch with Mother Nature, that piqued my interest. And so when I moved to New York, I joined a sailing club as part of my, like, what do I do in a new city, meet new friends, right, find community. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Through that experience, I've met amazing friends, and that's something that's hard to, I think, come by in New York City in a relatively short amount of time, is quality connections and consistency with people. And so the club I joined, the Manhattan Yacht Club, it's actually located in Jersey City, opened up the world of sailing to me, racing, teaching, and then eventually doing these offshore races, which is like a wholly different beast. So it's comparable, like the local racing we do in New York Harbor. It's kind of like doing like a 400 meter, 800 meter just around the track. The ocean racing is like a full on marathon. I mean, it is a sprint, but you're doing it every day, 24 hours a day with a group of people. Uh, you're all a little bit of off center to be able to do something like that, but it's an endurance race, and it's really a mental battle more so than anything. And there's so many parallels to sailing, especially racing, that I take from that world I bring into what I do on a day to day basis as a founder. Who you have on your boat, your team, is vital. There's specialization on the boat. You each have a role to play, and you need to play it. But you also need to have awareness of what each other's lanes look like and be able to hop in and help. And that's so true at early stage formation. You end up having a clear destination you need to get to, clear milestones, but you have to break it down into smaller chunks, because on a day-to-day basis out in the ocean, especially, the conditions you encounter on a daily basis will change. Wind, tide, things on the boat might and will break. And so it's really a wonderful environment to experience adversity, problem solving, creativity, communication, team learning, team building, learning how to endure suffering for periods of time. And I would say the most important learning I actually came away from the racing with is, boy, it's important to have a sense of humor and to be able to laugh. Because when it's 2 a.m., you're sitting out on the rail, it's pitch black, you're cold, you're wet, you're tired, you're hungry, you're miserable. You can't stop thinking about that warm bed back at home and a nice hot meal. When somebody can crack a joke and liven up the situation, it makes it all doable. So it's a constant reminder. It's become an annual ritual of mine to find my way into some kind of offshore race. 600 miles a year is my goal. So that's what I came away from that first experience in 2021 with. And I realized what it allowed for me to do, which is detach for about a week, fully detach. There's no internet on the boat to answer Slack messages or email. Life boils down to stay dry, stay fed, sleep as much as you can, and have fun. And don't forget to laugh.
So it's a week. So it's a week long race,
It
essentially.
depends. Some of them can be months long. These are not ones that I do. Truly like around
Hmm.
the world races. The ones that I've gotten
Wow.
into are around 600 to 700 nautical miles, which tends to take about 4 days, 4 or 5 days, depending on conditions and how you do and what breaks on the boat, because things will break always.
Yeah.
So it tends to be a 4 day sprint.
And how many people on the boat with you?
That can range, but I've had crews where we were about 16 people, and you tend to
Okay.
break up into two groups. And then I've done races with as many as 10 or 11 total. But yeah, you have your group
Okay.
of people, and that becomes your bunkmate. That becomes the person who gets up at 2 o'clock and makes a hot pot of water so you can all enjoy a cup of coffee, which I have to say, living in New York City, there's amazing coffee here, but there's no coffee I've had that's better than that one at 2 a.m. instant coffee, from the grocery store.
Yeah,
But it's about the
for
context in which
sure.
you have it.
No, for sure. And from what you're saying, I totally see the parallels in terms of a startup. And I feel like, another part of it, for better or worse, is like you have to endure the people as well, and you have to like, you know, even people you like after like 2 days without being able to move away from them, they're going to be annoying. And I think transitioning into the startup world, it's a very similar deal because again, when you're as a founder, you're hiring the people. So you generally are like, okay, like these people, but then
Mm,
when things get tough, you have to essentially endure them or appreciate that the quirkiness for lack of a better
yes, you have
word.
to have a lot of patience.
I can only imagine. So, no, that's really cool, and we're probably gonna come back to it because I think that's something that I wish I had looked into because that sounds uh, challenging, which is what attracts me. But let's jump into I wanted to get into kind of the ambient story because it's very interesting to me, and I'll let you give us a synopsis of it. But for me, it was what you said was you guys had a startup. You started basically pre-pandemic, and I'd love to hear the navigations of pre-pandemic thought process to into the pandemic and during and then after. But then almost a year ago transition towards ambient, what is today
Yeah.
ambient. And so I'd love to get into the original story. We'll talk about the pivoting and everything, but I'll let you start it
Yeah,
off.
yeah. When I say we, I'm talking myself, my co-founders, Lawrence especially. He's somebody who I've been working with for 9 years, and there's a through point there going back to 2015 when I joined his startup at the time. Stuck through it all the way to acquisition. I had moved to New York City, and then the opportunity arose again to build and go from 0 to 1, which is a new thing for me. And so we got together with another co-founder, and we put our heads together, and we wanted to build software to bring people together. That's what we worked on at that last company. It was called Double Dutch, an event technology company. As category leader, we built software for large events, conferences. And towards the end of Double Dutch, we were really toying with this idea of using software to connect people in the physical world. So matchmaking technology, questionnaires, using this, and also knowing real time who is in the building to be able to find you connections and jumpstart a conversation. And so we actually productized that for what we called the gathering. It was actually called the gathering. Pre-pandemic, we were facilitating these live events, uh, assisted by software, and we had our launch event circled for March, I think 17th, 2020, New
Oof.
York City, Chelsea Music Hall, 300 RSVPs. Like it was, we were ready. And then the launch event never came for obvious reasons. And I remember I was actually rereading some old documentation. Lawrence put together this memo trying to get our heads oriented around what was unfolding in real time. And I try to remind myself how little we knew at that moment when it went from, okay, we're going to start to shut down schools. And it just like the snowball started to build, and it became very real very fast. And the big question for us was,
Mhm.
well, do we abandon this entire business idea around building software for live events, which is no small decision to make. And we sat with it for not that long, actually. As good entrepreneurs do, is you try to take in the environment, take in the data, and make a sound but decisive choice. And so we chose to quickly pivot and digitize the matchmaking experience into what would effectively become Twine. So we rebranded, relaunched our product aimed towards events, virtual events, which were skyrocketing at the time. And we built software to run the networking components. So if you went to a virtual event, especially early on in the pandemic, most of them were just live streams, webinars. You'd log into an event platform, you'd have a digital agenda, and you'd have some live streams. It was really hard to actually connect with people. They had chat. There's one way to go about meeting people, but that's not quite the same as shaking someone's hand, meeting them face to face. And so the next best thing would be to be able to facilitate networking at these virtual events. And so we built software that effectively did that. So we were able to embed our matchmaking service inside of any virtual event platform. And so if you went to a virtual event and you met people, it was very likely you were using our technology under the hood to facilitate the matchmaking and the literal video connections. And so we kind of followed that trail. We saw immense growth, but we knew deep down that the growth we were seeing was heavily influenced by the inability for people to gather in person. And I think at the end of the day, as we have all realized, people still want that in-person touch, whether that's for events or even for work. Now, remote work became the next kind of durable wave we rode, working with large customers, hiring a global workforce that are now fully distributed. This problem arose, which is how do you help team members create connective tissue with each other, build trust, relationships that you normally build when you run into people in the office, which obviously wasn't happening to the same degree. And so we really leaned into that B2B use case, focusing more on internal events. And that took us down this route of building for CHROs, learning and development team leaders, and they were effectively tasked with how do you help build team cohesion for a distributed workforce? And it boils down to connecting your employees, giving them a reason to connect. That's not a meeting about a project or a Slack channel. There's a real face-to-face, one-on-one or small group dynamic that was missing. And so we went all in on that wave, and we got really, really far, but we didn't feel like it was going to last long enough. And as the remote work kind of tide started to recede, you started to see, maybe it's 3 days in the office, 2 days at home became kind of the de facto norm, more of a hybrid work schedule. We started to see the writing on the wall. This also coincided, by the way, with the release of ChatGPT in November of, I think it was 2022. So a lot of change happening in the world, these tectonic plates of COVID, pandemic, remote work, new generative AI that's becoming interactable by the everyday consumer. Just a lot of shifting around. And so we found our way into the AI space, building for chiefs of staff, heads of operations, and founders, and using the new technology that's available to us to help automate workflows. And so that's how we got to Ambient. We still actually have our networking products running inside of Zoom as well as on our web. We have some happy customers still connecting their workforces.
That's really cool. I'm going to jump back to the first product you were talking about, because that sounds, I'm just thinking in terms of like, even now, like after now we're, knock on wood, somewhat back to normal. And I've been to events where, there's an art to networking and not everyone has that skill. And I feel like that product makes so much sense because you don't need it anymore. It kind of levels the playing field. You're able to do that. So, no pressure, but if you guys are going to spin off another product, because I can already think of like 2 or 3 different events I've been to that would probably be interested in that product because it sounds really cool. And I think for a startup, one of the most important skills for founders to have is to ask the question or answer the question of like, what do people need right now? And I think if it wasn't for the pandemic, like that was perfect, right? What allows y'all to pivot as quickly as you do? Because that's another skill, right? That if you were to mull it over even longer, maybe you would have missed a tide, right? So what allows you to do that?
Such a good question. I actually think this question gets at the heart of, I want to say at the heart of entrepreneurship, but it's something deeper. It's really about journeying. What is it that propels people to take the steps they take, non-circuitous pathways that have not been charted out before? Like, what motivates people to do that, to go into the jungle, so to speak, with the machete and just start to clear out the brush?
Yeah.
Resilience is a word that comes to mind. I've been thinking a lot about this. Grit, determination. I think it boils down to survival, like at a very primordial motivation. It's not to say that we're out here literally surviving, and if this decision doesn't go well, our actual lives are done. Like, we live in wonderful cities. I'm out in New York City. My co-founder and the team are out in the West Coast. It's not the same as being in a true life and death situation, but we treat it that way. It's a serious business. We're ushering people's capital. We have our own time and energy putting into this. And so what allows for a team to adapt quickly? I think one, it helps to have leadership that have had experience. Lawrence is a multi serial founder, a serial entrepreneur. Like I said, I got to work with him at last company called Double Dutch, and through those 5 years that I was there, I saw the rocket ship growth of a late stage growth at all costs type mentality environment really hitting its stride, and then all the way through to the end, where you're trying to land the plane with the folks still on it. And I think the time spent in the trenches, where you build a lot of trust, makes it easier to make hard decisions when you have someone alongside you to do so. But it's also a recognition that things were changing very quickly, and as a matter of survival, indecision can be the thing that can kill you, that can end the business.
Yeah.
You might miss that wave. You might miss that one opportunity you have to get your boat in the water as the tide's rushing in. And it's a part of it is, there's analysis to do, and you can pontificate all you want behind a spreadsheet. But at the end of the day, if you're not out in the market talking to people, building an intuition about where things are going, you might miss that boat. And then when you feel conviction, and I think that's the big thing, is to start to develop conviction in the move that you want to make, you got to go, and you got to bring the team with you, and recognize that not everyone's going to come along for that ride. It's not the same ride that they might have signed up for beforehand. And we've had that experience, shifting from a live event business to a B2B SaaS business serving companies with remote teams to now pivoting into the AI space. Right? These are different pathways than the original ones, and sometimes not everybody wants to go down that path with you. But yeah, I would say the application of grit, resilience, determination, running from death, like that's the motivator, and I think that requires a high degree of adaptability to be able to shift context.
Yeah. No, that absolutely makes sense, and you're right that in the sense of like the experience of like being there before, that really makes sense too. So I'm gonna ask the flip side of that question, because I feel like based on the iterations you guys have gone through, there may have been opportunities to be like, oh wait, no, we need to go back, right? I can see that being something. Or so when and how do you know not to either go back or pivot again, or like how do you thread that needle also? Or maybe you guys haven't come across that issue where the opportunity didn't present itself.
No. I'm contemplating, because there's so many opportunities. It's about, I think it's about focus, and not chasing the new thing because it's new, or when you start to find resistance in the new path, to lose faith and lose conviction because you're met with resistance you didn't anticipate, and then revert back to what clearly wasn't working. Even though there were some positive feedback loops, it's really hard to do that, to remain disciplined through change. Because what I've learned is once you build enough conviction to make that call and you do it, it's really hard to go back. And that's why I think we take our time to build that conviction. And what's been really fun and interesting to watch as Lawrence and I have been evolving our relationship as co-founders over the years is we've faced many consequential turning points where we had to make big course altering decisions. Um, and it's interesting that we will oftentimes be thinking the same thing without saying it, meaning like we might feel deep down, both of us independently, that something's not working or something's not quite right with this approach or this focus. And we will individually sit with it for some days, maybe even weeks, to the point where we've given ourselves time to contemplate and think through as many scenarios as we can, and how, what if we do this, what would success look like. That by the time we actually come together and knock our heads, it's less about convincing each other why we should do it. It's like, okay, why shouldn't we? What are we missing here? And again, that's all part of that process of building conviction, because you have to be able to see what success could look like and what are the pathways to it, and also really question those assumptions and be honest about what are the things that we are potentially blind to, what are our potential blind spots, why will this not work, and have debate, honest debate. And that's something that we are able to do, which is, I think, a really good quality in any partnership, is the ability to honestly and with good intentions debate either side of the argument. So yeah, it's more about minimizing the need to have to go back. But when you're trying to find if there's a there in a different direction, sometimes it can help to have somebody go off, special team go off and investigate and put a little work into launching something small to get that conviction, to minimize that likelihood that you will have to reconsider and go backwards. But sometimes that's part of the process
Okay.
too.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I feel like I guess it comes from you know working together for a longer period of time, but also it seems as if you are both having the same thoughts, it's almost an objective thought, right? It stops being subjective when more than one person kind of
Yeah.
sees that independently. So that's really cool. And then all right, so the introduction of AI, right? So that was kind of the one of the things that came out of the pandemic that was somewhat all new to everybody. Everyone got on ChatGPT, the free version. Some people paid for it, and we asked it the dumbest questions randomly as like normal people. But deciding to figure out a way to turn it into a business model. Can you walk me through what that looked like? And again, going from pivoting as you have, this wasn't just a pivot, this was an addition of an entirely new technology base for the most part. And I'll be honest, for me, with when it came to AI, and it's funny, it's the first time it ever happened. It was like, so if to me at the time it felt like so many things. For the first like 6 months I was like, I'm not even gonna go on ChatGPT, I'm not gonna look at it, this it's freaking me out, it's too much going on. So that was one perspective, but the alternate perspective is, hey, like, this is cool, let's run with it. So yeah, tell me about how that went down, and what y'all are doing with it
Yeah,
now.
man, still learning. And I think anyone that tells you otherwise is not being forthright, because it's still so early. Uh, so I'll talk about the decision we made and how we transitioned the team and how we managed through that change as a business. It's a new identity, new product, new market, new tech stack, to your point. Um, and at the time, there's a and there still is a range of reception to this technology, to generative AI specifically. Um, there are the people who are early adopters. Let me play with the new toy. Let me see what it can do, and generally very forgiving. Then you have the skeptics, and then it's the spectrum, and there's lots of like in betweens. And at the time, our team was not fully on board with this new tech, because this new technology raises serious questions about the future of work and labor, and what does it mean to be a creative. We had some folks who were coming from the performing arts background on staff at the time, and you started to see how this technology can take other people's content and generate new content from it. So there's a real gap and a real challenge to getting the team fully on board and aligned and moving in the same direction to embrace this technology fully aware that we have a lot of questions that are not answered as we go forward. And what we chose to do was to get our hands around it. So one thing I did, it was kind of a little bit of a hack, but I strung together using Zapier and Slack a chat channel where you could basically just interact with ChatGPT directly from Slack. Now that was a little toy, it was just a little experiment. But the intention behind it was to allow for the team to interact with it. And out came some really funny moments, just ridiculous chats. It got really expensive really fast, so we had to shut it down. But what it did was it allowed for team members who weren't going to go onto ChatGPT and weren't really curious to start to poke around and see some of the edges of the technology and where it fell down, which at the time was often. So that was one thing, was giving people more exposure and finding different on-ramps to learning about the technology. And then we also ran an offsite where we had exercises where we would use ChatGPT as part of the exercise. So one of them was set up by this former marketing manager of ours, Samantha, and she has an acting background. And so her exercise was we'd break up in small groups, and then we would have to act out a little scene from a play. And there were two versions of the play, one that we wrote as humans and the other one that was generated by ChatGPT. And the goal of the exercise was to act out each scene in earnest and have the other team members pinpoint which one was generated by AI and which one wasn't. It was a super fun exercise. It allowed for people to get goofy, but also to interact with the technology, and again, in a much more approachable way. And it was dead obvious which one was which. But I think it helped to arrest some of the fear and uncertainty around this technology. Now, since then, and it's not been that long, but since then, it's gotten a lot better, and it's going to continue to get better. And so it's a never-ending cycle of evolution and understanding what the capabilities are, how it can be applied to what we're doing. And then to your other point, or the other question, which is business model, like how do you build a business on top of this technology? Now, we're an application layer company, and what that means is we're using large language models that others are building, and we're using it in conjunction with other technology to deliver the service that we're providing. And so Ambient is an AI assistant for chiefs of staff, heads of operations, and founders. And what Ambient does is it synthesizes data from meetings and eventually some other sources like email and chat, and it processes it down into different insights and action items. And so it helps you process this information into the work that needs to get done, saving time. That's an immediate ROI. But we think much bigger than that to connect the work that's happening in a business to the company's strategy, and using AI as a way to help understand what's happening at the ground level. How does it compare against the strategy? And then eventually getting into AI agents that can actually do work on behalf of team members. And so how do you price and package this technology and these product offerings? We're finding out. There's usage-based models, there's credit-based models. OpenAI is moving to a credit-based system where you pay for what actually gets done versus a perpetual license, like a seat access to the Salesforce license, for example. I think the world of SaaS is going to be upended in terms of business model and pricing and packaging, like I said. So it's going to be exciting. I don't know where it's going to end up, but it's definitely apt to change for sure.
Yeah, no. And so when it comes to like, so is Ambient something that runs, like, let's say if we're having a video meeting, it runs and collects the data as we're having
That's right. Yep.
And it compiles?
Yep.
Okay.
So the way it works is Ambient will join meetings. So much like a lot of other assistants, Otter, Fireflies, Gong, lots of tools out there that do a similar workflow where you're trying to process unstructured spoken word into structured data. But we really focus on the personas I mentioned before, and that means the workflows that they really care about. So action item extraction is one of our marquee features, because chiefs, founders, et cetera, are in meetings to move the business forward. And part of moving a business forward is capturing owners, actions, key dates, and then making that follow-up really easy, integrating with other project management systems, making that seamless. There's a lot of busy work that falls on the shoulders of these operators. And that's what we wanted to start with, because that's what this technology is currently really good at. And I can talk ad nauseum about what we've learned with respect to productizing and commercializing this technology, because there's some amazing things you can get ChatGPT, Anthropic, et cetera, to do. But to be able to do it reliably, consistently, such that you can ask somebody to spend money for you to deliver that, that's the hard part that has been, that's taken a lot of trial and error, a lot of testing. But that I think is how I view a lot of my role as head of product, is finding that Venn diagram overlap of what can the tech do, what do people expect it to do, which expectations can be pretty high nowadays, and what can we
Yeah.
deliver reliably and consistently. And if you can find the overlap in those three areas, and grow that overlap, I think that's the key to productizing this technology, and really building a sound business, is hitting on those expectations, technical capabilities with reliability and scalability in mind.
I mean, I feel, and it's for the people that you've made it for. I mean, who have, quote unquote, a lot of balls in the air. It really helps not to drop one,
That's it.
right? And I think everyone, even people that are not in those roles, someone might even want to take this like on themselves and not at enterprise level, just to be on top of things, right? And then there's, and frankly speaking, as I have friends and people who I know that are neurodivergent, it helps them stay on top of things too. So I think this is it's very interesting. I'm very excited to see where it goes. But so I'm gonna go back again, because I like to go back and forth. Let's go to 2015. Let's talk about how a 3-month contract turns into a deep dive into startups forever. And then I also want to get into how one would go from that to forming a relationship with the founder to become a co-founder at a future project. So we'll get there. But let's start at 2015. Tell me about the
Yeah.
contract. What were you supposed to do, and how did it get to where it's at?
Yeah. So I was trying to find my break into tech. I worked for a environmental education nonprofit in Santa Cruz, California, and that was my field of study: environmental studies, economics, and I did a minor in tech information management. And so, coming out of school, I found an incredible opportunity to work with a program leader and a teacher who had developed this organization to create Common Core aligned curriculum for environmental education for K through 12, and mainly to do programs outside of the U.S. where environmental education resources are very limited. And so it was an organization that had a nonprofit arm with a for-profit arm, and I worked on mostly the for-profit side. And we built and made reusable packaging solutions. So think, when you order glasses from Warby Parker and they send you a whole like package of frames to try on, you send it back. That packaging used to be single use. Same with all these other clothing companies that would send you a box of clothes, you try some stuff on, you send it back, all single use packaging. So that was the problem we worked on. It's a big problem, very expensive problem. It was a tiny organization, and I just wasn't getting the kind of, I wasn't in the right environment, I think, for what I wanted to do in terms of learning and growth. So I recognized that, and I sought out a way into the tech world. I really was quite naive. I didn't have a great network in Silicon Valley in the tech space. And so I had a long list of companies I had been searching for, applied to. I probably sent out 50 applications and heard back from 3. One of them was a company called Double Dutch, which was a market leader for mobile event technology. And the opportunity was a 3-month contract on the sales enablement side of the business, but it was under the growth team. So the growth team there focused on finding different levers in the business to drive growth. And so it was a contract position to effectively automate part of our sales flow, the demo flow, where if you're a prospect, you're seeking out technology for your event has a brand to it, it has a community. These event professionals were really amazing, experienced designers, and so they want software that can complement their aesthetic, their brand, etc. And so what made for a really impactful demo was software that looked and felt like their event. And so the hypothesis the growth team was trying to build out and test was, if we built tech to automate the customization of this demo experience, what would that do to sales pipeline in terms of um, uh, accelerating the close, getting to higher deal sizes. They weren't really sure exactly the impact, but it seemed like a good idea to test out. And so they put some humans behind the screen to build out these demo environments, and I ended up becoming a product expert for Double Dutch and became a resource for people outside the sales team, asking questions about how things worked or what were a possible workaround. And it was because I'm really good with systems and really good with figuring out how they work and finding their edges. And so I just obsessed about the product. I was soaking up the experience because I knew it was a short-lived contract. And my mindset was get into this company. It's a foothold into the tech world, and just be as valuable as possible and find more things to do than what's being asked of you. So it was a mentality I brought to the table, and I caught the bug. That 3-month contract I was able to parlay into an indefinite contract on the growth team, reporting to a gentleman named Matt Ziegler, who is now, I think, head of corporate strategy at Stripe, former chief of staff at Double Dutch to Lawrence. There's some parallels there between what we're doing now at Ambient for chiefs of staff and my experience there. And so I worked on the growth team for about a year and a half, and then made a transition into business operations and analytics under a new manager named Andrew Ostarello, who became one of my close mentors and managers. And he really helped me develop more of my technical skill set. And then I found another opportunity to lead the marketing team at Double Dutch through the acquisition in 2019 by Vista Equity Partners and Cvent, which was the big tech company in this space. So as I think back at my experience, I brought a founder mentality to the table. And I think that was part of why I stuck around for so long, was I just wanted to hop in and find where I could add value and find the next problem and figure it out. And I think that kind of mentality and skill set lines up well with a founder. And so when the opportunity came up to build with Lawrence, I couldn't find a good reason not to. And it's been the right environment for me to allow for that dynamism to be explored.
I think there's a huge lesson there. As someone personally, like I am contemplating the thought process of founding a company, and I say that as if I'm about to just wake up and decide to do it, but it's something that intrigues me. But I think there's a huge lesson there for anyone that's looking either to found or just like you said, like you were trying to do, get into tech. It's the mindset, right? It's that ownership and it's the curiosity, which you brought into it. Did the role matter to you, or was the company more important?
No, the role didn't matter to me as much. And frankly, I didn't know much about event technology. I was desperate to find my foot in the door, and I'm glad I landed where I did, but that was not because I was seeking out event tech. Turns out event tech is a really fascinating market to build for. And you can look at companies like Hopin, which was a COVID darling who grew to immense heights very quickly, and then also came crashing down to earth. And if you work in that space, in the event technology space, you could see the writing on the wall pretty early. It's a tough market to sell recurring software because events have this mind of their own. The event planners, these facilitators, have a mind for their community and their brand, and they want things to be fresh and new and exciting. And so that's not a great environment for repeatable, scalable technology that needs to cut across lots of different use cases all at once. And so it's a highly fragmented market, but you do see some pretty interesting companies in there. But I agree with you. It's the mentality. And so the title, the role was less important. It was what was I learning? So I had the opportunity to work on the growth team under some incredibly talented team members, Matt being one of them, and another one, Ankur, who managed me on a day-to-day basis, both consultant backgrounds. And so it helped me see how a different way to look at problem solving from like a consultant's mindset, which is one approach. It's not always the best one, but it's one approach, one perspective. And then working under my next manager, Andrew, on the business operations side, that allowed me to see the whole business, working with sales, support, account management, product engineering, and marketing, even the finance team, and just understanding the business at a system level. Because part of my role was to figure out how do we actually report on what's happening across the business in a standardized way. And then also not just a system level, but a human level. It's one thing to have a business where you've got all this fancy software, CRM, marketing automation, sales and support tools. On top of that, layering on top of each other, how do you make sense of it all? Well, part of it is how humans, the people using the tools, use it. That's going to dictate the data you see. And so that was a really good opportunity for me to learn that dynamic between the art and the science of business operations. It's not just about fancy tools and measurement and data, although that's a big part of it. It's really also marrying that with the narrative, the qualitative experience of the sellers, of the supporters, of the marketers. And I made so many mistakes in that job, but it gave me the exposure. It allowed me to understand how is a business instrumented. How does that show up when you bubble it up to a dashboard for an executive team or for a board? And then to see it from that board slide all the way down to the day-to-day reps experience. That was probably one of the most impactful experiences I had, because it's full picture stuff, technical skill set development too. So that was feeding that energy and that curiosity that I had to learn, and then the opportunity to lead the marketing team came up, and again, new challenge. I had some experience in marketing before, but it's a new challenge, and so that's what I've always embraced: is give me something new to learn, and I'll do my best.
Yeah, no, and I think again, it's a founder's mindset. But even if you're not a founder, if you have it, it can grow into something, something really good. And so you weren't from a technical background, like you said, and then you had an opportunity to learn uh, tech later on. Um, is that something that you I know that you're curious, you always want to learn, but it can be very daunting, right? For someone who, when you think of you need to learn technical skills, we just see like the Matrix, right, with all the different code and everything like that. So for someone who wants to get, I actually know many people that want to get into tech that aren't from the tech background. And so what would you say to them if they're apprehensive based on that? Like, because again, your path, really cool, really interesting. You're able to learn a lot from a non-technical aspect and build it in. But for people that are apprehensive, what would you say?
I'd first ask, what is it that they are apprehensive about, or what is it they might fear? Um, I think the world of tech and working at a tech company is, once you find yourself in it, you might be a little underwhelmed. It's not that special. Um, it's really not that special. And I think the especially in the heydays, even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when money was abundant and resources were abound, and you can throw more people at the problem, and obviously that script has changed. Sometimes being in tech is a really hard environment to be in, because of the pressure and the timelines that need to be hit. For people who are, I guess, on the outside looking in, I think there's a question of what do you feel you are uniquely good at? Um, and I think there's probably a base level of technical know-how that you'd want to have coming in. So let's say you're on the sales side, coming in as a business development rep, which is a fairly junior role. Um, knowing how to navigate software can save you a lot of time. And if you're in a selling role, anytime you're not spending on the phone with someone trying to get them to that next stage is time most often not spent well. So knowing how to use software, how to use computers, being good with data hygiene. I mean, these are good practices and good skills to have. That's not unique to tech. Let's say you want to get into an engineering role. There's lots of pathways in terms of code boot camps and things like that, but the competition is fierce, really hard. Um, my recommendation is always going to be to find people who are in the seat you want to be in, find connections, make connections, bring something to the table, and find out firsthand if this is the place you actually want to end up. It can save you a lot of time. And if it is, these people, that network is what's going to help you develop the specific skills you do need to get to that next level or get to that next role. I was talking to a friend of mine who's in a consulting role, one of the large consulting firms, and he's looking outside in. And he's been in a consulting role for several years. He's got really good chops, good communicator, good written communication, analytical skill set. I sensed the same kind of apprehension perhaps you're alluding to. And my main recommendation to him is come with me to events, start meeting people in the space. Uh, Businesses thrive on talent, good talent, problem solvers, divergent thinkers. And it's hard to imagine finding a company that would really want you just by sitting behind the screen looking at LinkedIn listings that are probably outdated, probably not going to be followed up on, and or heavily competed with thousands and thousands of applications. How do you rise above that noise? I think it's network. I think that's the answer. Is the people who you know and who know you for what you bring to the table, your values, your work ethic, your skill set. So that's where I recommend people spend time, is developing your network. And at some point, if you keep at it, uh, the purpose will become clearer. The type of people you want to focus on connecting with will become clearer over time. Uh, and I mean, this is an example with you, man. We met at an event. I forgot, it was right before Christmas, and we saw
Yeah.
each other again at another event. Like after a while, you start to see the same faces. You start to build some trust there, and you get cool opportunities like to be on your podcast and to share some of my stories. So I would say the networking is probably the most important thing, whether it's navigating a new career change, figuring out what skills to up level, talking to people that are doing it already is a great shortcut to getting to good answers.
Yeah, agreed. So I remember there's a quote that was like, "Action cures fear, or exposure cures fear," and I think when you're looking at tech or startups as a thing in the sky, it's it's very easily scary. But if you're in there speaking to people that are working at startups every single day, and you're like, "Wait, I'm the same as this person." I actually have. It's funny you mentioned someone in consulting being apprehensive, because I have two friends of mine. They're almost exactly same age, and they literally just did the opposite of what the other one did. So one person went to um, consulting right after college. One person got a master's. The other person came back from consulting, got an MBA. The one person was contemplating an MBA, didn't get an MBA, went into startups, and then they kept doing that. And in my mind, I'm like, if either wanted to switch over, it's just one conversation, right? It's just one conversation. Like, oh, this guy's the exact same person I am, just in a,
Yeah.
So um, that
Yeah.
sounds awesome. And I think let's transition, because from what we've been speaking about, and something you mentioned you want to talk about, which I think is the underlying thing that comes down to it, mental fitness, which I think is, I love that term, which I think is because what you said on the thing was that people think about their physical fitness all the time, and sometimes mental fitness goes by the wayside, which is so true. So tell me about your mental fitness routine. How do you keep yourself fit
Yeah.
mentally, and what made
Yeah.
you what even brought that about for you?
Yeah. I hope one day we talk about our mental fitness like we do our workouts at the gym. Because that would demonstrate a level of candor and honesty that I think doesn't exist too often. And so, where this came about, out of necessity, the startup journey is fraught with all sorts of hazards. Some you might read about, and maybe you don't really internalize it until it's happening, where you feel your body feels like you're in survival mode more often than not, and that has a physiological impact. When your body is in a stressed state for prolonged periods of time, it can really affect you not only mentally but physically. So my attention paid towards this arena uh, was out of necessity, because I was not adjusting very well. Um, and it shows up in other places too: relationships, friendships, family. Um, it can be all consuming, this kind of job, and it's not unique to startups and founders, although I think it's acutely felt by most, because it's such a risky environment that has so many ups and downs. And it can be within the same hour, you can feel the most extreme high and the most extreme low. And so after years of encountering this dynamic and not really knowing how to handle it in productive ways, I started to seek out information, seek out help. Um, So I'll share a couple stories. I found this group of people who would gather every Friday night in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and they would gather a small group of people for they called it fire and ice. It was a sauna, like hot, really hot sauna, and then two ice tubs outdoors, someone's driveway in Flatbush. It was kind of a weird environment. I remember my first time going, I was pretty nervous, but I ended up getting to know this community intimately well. I was there every Friday for years, a couple of years until the pandemic changed everything and people moved away. But the people running that are breathwork practitioners, yoga instructors, performance coaches. They are really tuned to helping people realize their own individual potential, not just physical, but mental. And so that was my first kind of exposure to different practices. I think nowadays getting into the ice tub is seen as cool, which is great. I think more people are
Yeah.
doing it. It's less about
Yeah.
how long you spend, though. It's really about what you're getting from that experience and what's doing to your body, helping you stress your body out in a really productive way. Because at the end of it, you're in a much more calm, seduced, parasympathetic state, your nervous system. And whenever I do those types of practices, I feel a lot more at ease. Things that would normally perturb me roll right off. Um, and so that showed me the power of tapping into your nervous system and how that can affect what other things do to you, new information, problems, issues. Taken one day without that practice, I might become very reactive. Taken another day after some
Mm.
practice, I might be able to sit with the conflict a little bit longer and think through a better response. So that was the beginning. Um, and then over the years, just yoga, breath work, hot, cold, like these were things that I knew were good for me that helped me in different ways connect my mind, my body, and my breath. But I didn't really put all the pieces together until very recently. And I'd like to tell this story um, because it just happened, and it I think perfectly sums up where I think things are at today in the state of startup land. So I was at an event hosted by Primary Ventures. They do a state of startups event every year, and wonderful content speakers talking about macro trends, AI, investment trends, enterprise buying trends, like all sorts of cool, interesting, businessy stuff. It's a room full of founders and investors. And I remember this one fireside chat between one of the GPs at the fund and this executive at Alma, the mental health care company. And the content, the subject matter for their conversation, fireside chat, was about mental health. And I just remember looking in that room across from right and left, everybody was at the edge of their seat, investors and founders, most of which I would say 80% of the room was men. Um,
Mm.
and that's what told me that the content that we were just experiencing was probably the most important of that event. And I told the organizers that, and I actually followed up with the woman from Alma. Her name's Elizabeth, and I've had one conversation with her, and she steered me towards this concept called psychological flexibility, which is about someone's ability to adapt to changing situations, changing demands, the ability to reconfigure or reallocate your mental energy, your mental resources, your ability to shift perspectives and balance competing desires, needs, life demands. And so that on paper is like the world of a startup co-founder or an early stage company employee. You have a constantly shifting, changing set of circumstances. You have you have to balance competing needs, resource allocation. Good leaders are not knee jerk reacting, like we talked about at the beginning about how do we make these big course altering decisions. Well, you got to make them with conviction. Once you have conviction, you got to go fast. Doesn't mean you get to the decision fast, although you can't take too long. But once you feel conviction, you got to be ready to go and shift that perspective, reallocate those mental resources around. It's going to be tough to let go of what we were focused on, the customers we were focused on, the problem we were focused on. but you have to reallocate that mental energy towards what could be with this new direction. So getting over grief is a big part of that. Um, and so psychological flexibility articulates or puts into clearer terms something that I've been feeling and experiencing as a first time zero to one founder. And I liken it to, I don't think it's a perfect analogy, but it's the way my mind works is I try to apply it to what I know with physical body. So there's a concept called pliability. And the story I tell is how is it that Tom Brady, deep into his career in his 40s, is still slinging a football, throwing touchdowns, winning Super Bowls? Like, how is that? How is he doing that? Well, he figured out earlier on in his career that to keep his brain in the game, which is what keeps him, makes him unique, he had to keep his body in the game. Well, Tom Brady wasn't, I don't think, putting up hundreds of pounds on the bench press or squatting 600 pounds in his 40s. No, he was working on his mobility, his flexibility, pliability. And so I think some videos started to hit YouTube and Twitter and Instagram of Tom Brady's workouts doing pliability, effectively Pilates. And it's like, okay, there's a there. He's conditioning his body to be able to endure the physical strains of a football game. You got these young athletes coming to get him to put him in the ground, and he's finding ways to keep his body durable enough to take that punishment, to keep his brain in the game, to keep throwing touchdowns to Gronkowski and winning Super Bowl. So when I started to connect the two, it's like, okay, I have a lot of stuff I do to work on my physical well-being. Yoga is a big one. Still move weights here and there, but nothing too crazy. I really focus on mobility. Well, why am I not treating my mental well-being with the same approach? And so psychological flexibility is just one's capacity to deal with changing circumstances, shifting perspectives, balancing your competing desires. And so a higher degree of mental flexibility will likely lead to less stress, less anxiety, better decisions, uh, and ultimately learning to enjoy the process and get out of your own way.
It's really, so there's two things I want to pull from that. So the first one is, it's really funny that whenever you see like a sports injury, it's usually like a really quick movement that causes it. It's like a tweak that happens from a very quick movement. It happened in the Super Bowl, that just by dropping your foot the wrong way. And I feel like in a similar sense, when it comes to your mental health, and when you sustain mental injuries, in the sense of, if you have like either a panic attack or you spiral or whatever it is, it's usually like another quick thing. So I think one of the things it comes down to is like slowing down your mind, or stopping your mind, which is probably like the hard, like, right? That's why people meditate and all that stuff. So I think that's very interesting. Speaking about it in the sense of psychological flexibility, I think that wording is actually very cool. So thank you for bringing that to me, because I'm going to be using it and like really trying to see how that works for my mind. But one thing that I saw for the last few things we've spoken about is the connection between your mental and physical health. Um, and I think very, very often, uh, for people who do physical activity, whether it is working out or yoga or even like sailing is a physical activity, it does something mentally for us, right? So I
Yeah.
think, if I'm stressed out and I lift, I'm physically exhausted, but I'm mentally recharged. It's the actually inverse effect. And I think when it comes to people that are professionally, people who lift heavy professionally, quote unquote, like in terms of like thought process and mental and strategy and things like that, for people that I've seen that do that well, usually have a secondary physical thing that they're very passionate about, like your sailing. And it's ironic, because I was something that was already in my notes to ask you what you do, and you already brought up sailing. But I think, um, it's really interesting that it's so consistent across the board when it comes to physical and
Yeah.
mental.
Yeah. And I'll give you one learning from last year when things were tough with the business. And it's really easy to compound negative thought patterns when it happens daily, weekly, monthly. You face rejection all the time when you're trying to sell your product to prospective customers or to bring investors on. So one thing I realized was giving myself that time each week to get on the water. So I usually race on Tuesday nights locally, just small boats. Half of it's racing, half of it's the barbecue at the end. We're all together as a club, and I realized how important it was to have that hour or two to give myself, to disconnect from the phone, to be out in Mother Nature, to be working on a different problem. And it's, a different kind of stress, to your point, like with going to the gym, you're not there to kick back and relax. It's a different kind of stress, but it's that context shift that allows the brain to arrest its defense mechanisms and to get into a different state of being, such that at the end of the race, even if we didn't win, it felt like a win. And I could go to sleep that day feeling like, hey, at least this went right. And I think losing sight of whatever the activity is, can be anything that brings you joy. It can be really easy, I found, to let days and weeks go by where you don't feel like you're getting a win, because all of it's supposed to come from work, and when work is not going how you want it to go, that's tough. It's really tough, and so it's important, I found, to diversify and have other things in life that can bring you those moments of joy and make it feel like, hey, still got to win, still got out in the water, still had fun competing, still learned something new in this completely different domain. It's a way to almost trick your brain into still feeling some of those positive reward feedback loops, even if what you're focusing on 99% of the time is not going exactly how you want it to. Hugely important.
It is, and it's really funny you mentioned that, because I think people that achieve or that try to achieve difficult things, you fail a lot, right? Probably, honestly, you probably fail more often than you
Yes.
succeed. But you need to remember what winning feels like. So I think that's a huge one, because I remember there was this. I don't play tennis and I don't claim to, but a lot of my friends do. And one of the books I was reading at the time was talking about um, in when you're playing tennis at a very high level. Again, you're losing a lot on your way up. It's going to happen. So the general idea in success is, oh, you should always punch above your weight. You should always play with people harder than you to get better. But this person was like, yes, but once in a while you should go one lower and win, just so you don't forget what winning is like. Because if you get used to losing, if that becomes your norm mentally, right, you might actually forget how it is to win. So I think, again, this being a different arena, that thought process of winning is so cool. And speaking about psychological flexibility, and speaking about, and we alluded to it, that the physical exercise takes your mind away from the work stuff. But the biggest, one of the hottest topics right now is burnout, right? Everyone's talking about it. It's like, how do we make sure we're not burnt out? And I think, again, for high achievers like yourself, that's probably the easiest thing to conform to, is burnout. Just keep going, right? Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop. How do you, besides sailing, how do you make sure that you're not burning out, or your team's not burning out? Actually, for you, that's probably a bigger thing, because you can control yourself and go out and go on a boat. Sometimes people that you work with, they're not thinking the same way, or they're just stuck on the goal, right? So how do you help them prevent burnout?
Really good questions. Um, and it's something I still actually have to be very mindful of. I know the signs now from myself, at least, what to look for when I'm starting to really dig into my internal battery, where I'm not recharging more than I'm taking away each day, and that over time, that net drain can lead to feelings of burnout. I notice it in my behaviors, forgetting small things. I'm usually not forgetful, but when I am, that's a good sign. My breath. If I'm not consciously breathing, I will go through an entire day of just really shallow breathing in the chest, and that has all sorts of physical ailments associated to it over long periods of time. I think a general lack of presence. That's probably the biggest tell for me, is if I'm not engaged in anything else but work. There are obviously diminishing returns to that, and so I try to combat it not by running 1,000 miles all day every day until I break and then recover. I try to run run fast, feel the body, listen to the body, modulate down a bit, down regulate when I can. So to try to kind of maintain a consistent pace that's slowly ramping up over time versus this like boom and bust cycle. But to your other question about the team, it's really, really hard because the demands are so high all the time, especially when you're still trying to affect change in a new market, bringing a new product, building a new tech stack. And you're also learning as you go. And so some decisions we make 3 months ago on our architecture might not have been the right ones to make in hindsight. And so that adds more stress to work through complexity that is just complexity you acquired because you didn't really know exactly where this thing is supposed to go. So um, being really trying to listen and observe for signals of burnout from other people, even if they might not articulate it. I think that's like good leaders should try to be attuned to their team. Hard to do when you're remote, which we are. Much easier when you're in the same office space. Um, and being really gracious about time off and being really encouraging of it, and also modeling it, taking a long weekend or taking a half day here and there to spend time with family, whatever that thing is. It's always out of good intention, and so making that a cultural norm, I think, can give people that implicit permission to take that trip that you need to take to Japan or whatever that thing is, and that can help allow for team members to feel empowered to take action on what they're feeling. Um, I'm not going to pretend that we have all the answers, that I've learned all I need to learn about how to manage it internally or externally, but I do know being more aware of what the signs are early on for myself and trying to figure out what those are for others, and being proactive is the best way to maybe not necessarily always avoid burnout, but know where your limits are and try to catch yourself before you breach those limits. And then all the practices I've talked about and many others are just tactics. These are tools, these are exercises. And it's never a state that I arrive at that I'm like, okay, now I'm done with the work. It's a constant effort.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a mentality.
Yeah, I mean, life's a journey, right? Like we're
Mm-hmm.
always forever learning and walking the path. But I think I want to firstly applaud you, because I think at the end of the day, uh, we're always in every aspect are leading by example. So you saying modeling that and taking time off as a leader, I think that's one of the most important things, because I think when you join either a new company or if you're part of a company, you don't know it's a safe space unless the boss does it, for the most part, right? And it's the same thing they say about like raising kids. Like they're going to do what they see you do. So same goes for leading a team and leading a company. So on behalf of your employees, thank you, because I know they want to thank you for that for that model.
I'll say,
Speaking
can I say
about,
one more thing
oh,
on
go ahead.
that? I guess one other thing I've learned is the importance of having a team. Because when I take a week off to go do those offshore races, it's really hard for me to step away, really hard, because I am out of reach. And reliably, what's given me that sense of permission is knowing that my team's got my back. And of course, I know they always will, and that they're more than capable. But it's different when you actually see them step up. It makes it easier to take that time off. And so it's one thing to say, okay, if everyone's going to take the same week off, that might be hard for the business to keep operating. But having a group that understands each other's needs, and you can find ways to align the calendars in a way where there's coverage too, um, that makes it good for the people and good for the business, because that's always something I'm concerned about, is letting the foot off the gas. And I think that's one reason why a lot of people don't give themselves permission to take time off, is they feel like without me, this thing's not going to work. Um, so I think it's important to have a team that's supportive, such that you can take your foot off the gas just for a little bit to recharge, and reliably I come back with a clear head, uh, but better clarity about what's important. I mean, there's benefits to my role and what I do by taking time off, but a big part of that success is having a team that can step in and cover for you. And I think that's got to be true for large companies as well.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that, mindset of ownership,
Yes.
right? When you have a team that owns the result, you know, and again, your role is obviously very important. You're driving, product at this company, but if you're not there for a week and everything breaks down, then there's another thing that's wrong that needs to be addressed, right? Essentially, obviously, depending on the week, depending on what's going on, it's all context. But I think again, building a team with that mindset is very, very important. And obviously, you've done that. So when it comes to remote work, though, I do want to, because right now there's a war in the workforce, and it's something that we've discussed on this podcast in the past. When it comes to remote work, and you've alluded to, and that's some of the products that you've worked with, because sometimes you don't connect, and all these different thought processes. But your take on the future of remote work, what do you think? And yeah,
Yeah.
loaded
There's
question,
so
but no
there's so
pressure.
much potential. Um, there's a lot wrapped up into this because I live in New York City, and this is not the cheapest metropolitan area to live in. Um, and so now that there are companies that have established remote distributed workforce policies, it makes it viable for people who live in um, high cost cities to be able to move away from the HQ and move to a place where they can, stack some money, and it's more affordable, or they can take that 3 month trip to another country that's close enough time zone aligned, and allow yourself to have a worldly experience you would never have if you were tethered to the office. Um, and then there's the case where, I really do like having in-person time with my team. So I'm back in California very often. And that's invaluable time that you cannot replicate on a Zoom call. You can get close with some of the stuff that we were doing, but even still, they're just happen chance interactions that you just can't have when you're not physically close. And so, um, I think it's what's important to think about from a employee perspective is what your needs are, your circumstance, who you're providing for, making sure you're finding yourself in a position where you can still do that. And sometimes having a company that promotes or allows for remote and flexible work can allow you to be present with your family. I think about some friends of mine who've had kids in the last few years, and their ability to be a father at home and see their child grow up is wholesale different than what my father experienced, having to be in the office 5 days a week, traveling a lot. Um, so yeah, I think it's for some company cultures it fits and it's an advantage. For other company cultures, it's not, and they need to have people in the office. And certainly for certain types of businesses, you can't do the work remote. If you're talking about um, drug discovery or anything to do with hard sciences, you probably need access to equipment that's not going to be easily transportable to your home office. So I think there's lots of nuance with the type of work. Um, but for those who have a role to play in creating the environment for employees to choose where they work, um, I think there are a lot more upsides than there are downsides to having flexibility be a standard part of the offering you have to your employees. I don't know many people who would say, I don't want flexibility, even though some people might want to be in the office 5 days a week. Great, they've got that option. But if you allow for team members to also have time away and time at home, care for loved ones, family, children, I think that becomes a really easy perk to offer. And you don't lose much on the productivity side so long as you have a good, strong culture and really good management. That's where I think things can fall to the wayside is people kind of hide. You can very easily subvert attention by hiding away from the office, and that's a problem. Um, yeah, it's a hot hot debate, and it's been roiling since it started in the pandemic. And I remember being square in this meeting CHROs, chief people officers, who were tasked with figuring out what is the company's policy on remote work, and oscillating between fully remote to 3 days in the office. Some people have made life-changing moves to move to a different geography under a different expectation set. And now that's changed, and that's tough. So I think making it really predictable, making the expectations clear, I think those are good principles for any big decision like that from a leadership perspective. And I truly believe if you have team members who are able to tend to their families, tend to work, they will be better employees, better team members because of it, because they realize this is not a given, especially nowadays too, when things are getting tighter in the market.
Yeah, I mean, apparently everything comes back to flexibility for this conversation, because it's what everyone yearns for. But no, I totally agree. I think uh, one thing that you said, I think really nails it, is that it comes down to culture, right? Like if your company goes fully remote and everything falls apart, that's another underlying problem. Like it's there's always another cause as to what's going on. It comes back to culture, but yeah, no, I concur. And for a lot of places, like think about if right, my friends live in Jersey, they just got 5 days a week. I'm not gonna name their company, but they just got 5 days a week mandate. That's 2.5 hours a day on train. And again, it's one thing if that's what they signed up for, but if you start off remote and then you change it, it's tough. So there's definitely different ways to do it. And yeah, some companies need to be in the office 5 days a week. I
Yeah.
absolutely get that. And also there's a study about junior employees.
Mm.
It says the more junior you are, the more you gain by going into the office. So
Yeah.
this conversation is going to go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, if I were in my shoes back in 2015, a 3 month contract, and I had the choice to be remote, I'd be in the office 5 days a week. And I was for more than 8 hours a
Mhm.
day, because my motivations at that time earlier on in my career were I need to be growing. I need to be around smarter people than me, and I want to be a sponge. And that's best served in person, where you have that direct line of communication and the ability to go walk around the office and bump into a chief product officer and like grab coffee. How often are you going to get that opportunity to sit and be on your laptop? So I think there's also a circumstance in terms of where you are at your career. I'm glad you raised that point
Yeah.
too, because that's about individual ownership over your decision. Yeah.
No, 100%. I'm even for myself, like I'm like thinking about my next opportunity. And I'm like, I'm so down to get an Airbnb for 3 months and live wherever the headquarters, even if it's a fully remote job, but for 3 months, live in that state or that town, and just go in. Because again, even if you're an experienced person, if you're new to a company, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot of stuff you got to figure out. So, yeah. All right. So, Taylor, I have one more question, in particular about ambient, and then I'm going to jump into uh, a few more things that I do for wrapping
Cool.
up. But I want to ask this one question. So, how does, in terms of marketing an AI product, um, what's the, well, you can tell me what the biggest challenge is, but how are you differentiating yourself from the companies that are popping up right now? Because AI is hot. But again, from hearing about what Ambient does, it's hitting nails on the head for people that really, really need it. But aside from saying like we'll help you, what are y'all able to do?
Yeah. Um, it is a really noisy market. And one thing that the team decided to do as we ventured into this new world with generative AI is picking a really narrow lane to start, a really clear persona to build for, and it's so alluring to tackle so many problems because this technology can tackle a lot of problems all at once. But you start to dilute what it is that you do, who it's for, why it matters, and why you're different amongst the sea of everybody else. To your point, um, that can say they do the same thing. It's longer discussion too about what happens when all of a sudden, almost overnight, a technical moat no longer is really a moat. You equalize the ability to have access to the same very powerful technology. Well, then it really puts the onus on your ability to bring it to market, to have really thoughtful user experiences and design, and really aim your solution set towards really hard to solve problems. And so I think there's this new shift going back towards organizations that have wonderful product marketing are likely doing better than those that do not, even though the technology is really advanced. So what we chose to do with Ambient was we focused on one persona. It's a chief of staff. And the reason why we focus on chiefs of staff is they embody that which we're trying to do for an organization, which is connect the strategy to the execution. What is happening in the business, and how does that compare to where we said we want to go? And there's so many parallels to sailing. You have a race, you have a destination at 600 miles away. You can't see it, but you know it's there. And so what do we need to do on a day-to-day basis to get to our goal? And it requires somebody or multiple people to be able to orient the team. Here we are today. Here's our next set of stuff we got to do. Pick your head up and look at the big picture and make sure you're still going in the right direction. That's the chief of staff through and throughout. It's the founder too. If there's no chief of staff on staff, the founder is the one obviously doing a lot of that orientation and picking their heads up out of the weeds to look at the big picture, come back down, and make sure you're operating in accordance to where you want to go. So that was the person we wanted to start to build for. And as we met more chiefs, my co-founder went on this crazy sprint late last year, met 100 or so in a very short amount of time to really validate what we're doing. And then between him and I, we've talked to over 500 chiefs of staff. You start to detect patterns, even though the role itself, as you know, is varied. People's background is varied. The scope of the role inside of a company can be varied. It's context dependent. It's cultural, a lot of nuance, but there are some common workflows that exist. And so we discovered, for example, it's very common for chiefs of staff to run exec staff meetings, one-on-ones, exec staff, special projects. And for each of these meetings, which tend to recur every week, every day, the chief has a giant Google Doc for each one of those meetings, and they just enter new space on it, put a new date, and then there goes the handwritten notes, action items in this long document. And so this is one of the insights that drove us to build a feature called Meeting Series Management, where you can connect your calendar to Ambient and we'll generate that document for you and we'll write it and we'll keep it up to date automatically with notes, action items, owners, key dates. And now we're generating AI insights by analyzing meetings that happened in the past to start to identify trending topics, blockers, dependencies, and starting to log decisions that were made, decisions to be made. So that's a really specific workflow and a really specific feature set and a user experience that you're not going to find from other tools that do something similar, where they join your meetings, they process the audio, the video into a transcript, and they generate a summary. So that's one example of like where having a clear focus on an ICP can take you to new insights that you're not going to find just by searching online. And then the depth of the product in terms of how it really fits their needs is very clear once you start to use it. And it shows. We've got some really wonderful customers who tell us anecdotally they've tried a lot of other tools that fit similar use case or have a similar user experience to it, but they articulate this feeling that they have that Ambient knows what I need as a chief of staff, and that we're doing something to tune the models for them. And that's what you love to hear when you're building something for someone, is that they actually see themselves in the product. That's what you shoot for. And that kind of reaction only comes from a product that is shaped by them. And so we take a lot of input from chiefs of staff, heads of ops, and founders to shape the inner workings of how the product works, such that when they do try it, it's self-evident that it's different and it's tuned for them. So that's why we went really narrow, was to rise above the noise. And we got really close with community leaders in the chief of staff world, as you know, because we wanted to earn that trust. And I think that's the right approach nowadays to bringing something to market, is you want to bring something that's trusted, validated, and then when people try it, they actually see themselves in it. Sounds simple. Obviously, it's harder to do in practice, but it's really that simple.
Yeah. No, and honestly, And we again we met at a chief of staff event. I see it a lot of those. So being about your client, that's the number one thing, and y'all have definitely done that. So very cool. Really excited to see more from Ambient. But all right, so I'm gonna do next is I call it the Dear Tech FAQs,
Cool.
right? So these are FAQs in the sense that I ask these questions frequently. No one else asks them. So first one is, what is the best advice you have ever gotten, or your favorite quote? You can either or that one.
Slow down. That's probably the best advice I've gotten. It came up first for whatever reason. And actually, it was taught to me from a mentor of mine in the sailing world. And I have this habit of getting ahead of myself sometimes. When you're racing, you have a series of sequences you have to follow. Each person has a job, and it has to be timed and choreographed. And if you're out of sync or you make the wrong move at the wrong time, you could break something, you could get hurt. So lots of good reasons to be in sync with the team. And so I would have this habit of rushing my job, and I would end up out of sync. And so some of the best advice I was given in that world that I apply to everything is slow down, take a breath, really think about your moves. And I think I try to think like why was it that I was rushing? I think there's nerves involved. I think there's the anticipation, maybe lack of confidence. So over time, as I'm able to feel what right feels like, you can kind of calibrate to that, and then yeah, nowadays when I'm in a stressful situation, that voice is in my mind to just take a breath, slow down. Panic never helps. Knee jerk reactions never help. Uh, I think it relates to the psychological flexibility directly because that practice is really about putting more distance between some kind of trigger that triggers something emotionally and then your reaction that you want to have. Like the more distance you can put between the thing that triggers you and the reaction you want to have allows you to contemplate what reaction do you really want to have that aligns with your values. And that only comes from pausing, slowing down, taking that breath. Go slow to move, go fast, and you hear that trope all the time. So I would say that's probably some of the most useful advice I've gotten, and I use it on a daily basis.
I love it. I love how everything we talk about basically full circles because we're talking about how fast movements cause injuries. It's the same everywhere. I love it. All right. Second one. What is the best investment you've ever made? It could be personal, it could be professional, it could be whatever it is. What would you say is the best investment you've ever made?
I think the investment in time uh, to teach people how to sail. So that's one thing I do on the side. And I was asked by my mentor in the sailing world to do this a few years ago, and I was very apprehensive. Imposter syndrome, am I good enough? How do I do it? But after a few classes, I started to really feel good about what I was doing and really the impact you can have. And so I know what the value is of having good teachers in my life has been in terms of how they've inflected my life and confidence building and all that. So I think the time invested in teaching and learning how to connect with people in different modalities that everyone learns differently has been so enriching. And you know, when you have to teach something, you learn that material inside and out. So there's obviously a lot of benefit there. But I would say teaching. I was just meeting another founder builder who's putting together curriculum around breath work, and he's a teacher as well. And it just, yeah, not everybody can do it, but good teachers are what makes society move forward. Uh, and imparting knowledge is an important aspect to what I think everyone as an adult should take on as a responsibility to impart knowledge into future generations. I think that's a sense of it's a responsibility I think we all should take. So teaching, yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I also will say that I would love to come on a boat and learn because sailing sounds Awesome. Stressful, but awesome. Ooh, best thing you've ever been gifted.
You can tell you didn't send me these ahead of time because I don't have any prepared answers.
Nope. Nope. That's the point. I don't want you to think too much about it.
Best thing I was gifted. My love of music. It's not a traditional gift, but it's something my father inadvertently gave to me growing up listening to a lot of classic rock, and he played guitar. Music is a really important part of my life. It's a way for me to connect to him and to other people. It's brought me into new friend circles. It's brought a lot of joy. So the gift of music, of movement, yeah, I would say that's one of the
All
best
right.
ones.
All right. That's awesome. Yeah. All right. Two more. So one is, what would you put on a billboard for millions of people to see, or on a T-shirt? If you put one thing on a billboard tomorrow, what
I
would it
know
be?
this answer because I have a T-shirt that says it. It says "Just breathe, just breathe." A huge believer in controlling our emotional reactions to things, and that happens through connecting your mind, your body, and your breath. And it's the first thing that goes for me when I get stressed is my breath work. So just breathe.
Awesome. All right. And the last one. This is mostly for me because I love hearing about books. What is the book that you've gifted the most,
Mm,
and or your favorite book? You can pick either of those, but
yeah.
yeah.
Uh, I every chance I can where I feel like it's gonna have an impact in someone's life is recommending the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It was a book recommended
Mm,
to me. It's all about the
yeah.
journey being the reward. It's a simple, beautiful story. It's one of the most highly translated books in the world. I think maybe close to the Bible, something ridiculous. So it shows that the stories resonate in so many different cultures. And at that time when that person recommended that book to me, I was still trying to figure out my identity and trying to reconcile a lot of things that are happening in life, and it gave me a new context point. It was really helpful to read that book in that moment. So whenever I have a conversation with somebody or meet somebody new, and it feels like I'm talking to myself at that point, I always just make the recommendation to check it out because it's an easy read, it's cheap, it's very accessible, and I found it to be quite profound for me.
Yeah, I think everyone that's read that book says that. Um, it's something I read, I think, like twice a year, just because, like, if you're ever in the cusp of being lost a little bit, or you need some direction. I mean, you don't get the magic stones, but it's close enough, right? Like that he had in the book. All right. So wrapping up, what would you say is next? What's next for you? What is the next thing you're excited about? Um, Anything in any aspect.
Well, I have so much going on with Ambient. That's a huge part of my life, and it's a privilege to build with the team that I'm building with, and figuring out that puzzle together. So that's a big one. For me, I have another race coming up in July in Greece called the Aegean 600. So I'm getting my mind ready for that one. And we got some other races locally with the team. So those are some things I'm looking forward to. Just the journey that takes me to all of those.
That's awesome. And then as we wrap up, last one, where can people find you? Where can people learn more about you? And I'll if there's links and stuff, I'll throw
Yeah.
that in the
Yeah,
description. But yeah.
LinkedIn's great. I'm not the most active social media user, but I'm in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in California, so I'm back between both places often. And yeah, I'll shoot my LinkedIn. I'll add that to the show notes. Happy to reach out or to talk to anyone that reaches out and pay it forward.
All right, awesome. And is there anything you wanna say as we wrap up?
Thank you. No, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on to Dear Tech. And it's wonderful because I remember the first time we met, you had actually talked about this show, and it's great to be able to sit here with you and converse. So thank you.
Thank you. No, that's awesome. This was a great conversation. All right, so I guess we'll see everyone next time.